With the Arakoa nation destroyed, we now turn our attention to the one race whose actions would change the world of Draenor forever. Let us finally dive in and learn about the beginning of the Orcs. If this is your first time here, it's important to know that this video is a continuation of a series of episodes abridging the World of Warcraft Chronicle series. Currently, we're on Volume 2, so if this is your first visit to the channel, then I suggest watching the video that has every episode from Volume 1. I'll leave a link for it in the description below, or you can click the link in the tag up above. But if you're all caught up, then let's jump back in and find out what's going on in the Tales of Azeroth. Before we jump into the deep end and start talking about the Orcs, we need to wrap up a few things that were left out in the last episode, mostly regarding the Arakoa. Driven by the thirst to reclaim the lost glory of the Apex's civilization, the Arakoa leader Yanzi led his Skalaxi followers to the coastal ruins of Talador, only to find the site guarded by the massive and primitive Ogre. Realizing that the Arakoa lacked the physical strength to displace these brutes, Yanzi devised a cunning plan to empower the Ogren's downtrodden ogre slaves by teaching them the secrets of arcane magic. The ogres, possessing a natural affinity for the earth and a lineage tracing back to the Titan-forged Nagrand, proved to be terrifyingly efficient students. Under the secret tutelage of the Skalaxi, a sorcerer named Gog emerged as a symbol of hope. He did not initially strike at the Ogre, but instead performed the impossible by slaying 5 Groan, the titanic, godlike predators that the ogres had feared for generations. This act of Groan slaying shattered the psychological chains of his people, igniting a worldwide rebellion that saw the ogres utilize their newfound sorcery to tear their former masters limb from limb, scattering the remaining Ogren to the wilds. The victory, however, proved to be a bitter one for the Arakoa. As Yanzi and his kin moved into the ruins to claim their coveted crystal relics, they were met not by grateful servants, but by an emboldened king. Proclaiming himself Gorgog, the sorcerer-king established the capital city, Goria, and ordered the Arakoa to leave the land they had paid for in blood. When Yanzi attempted a desperate midnight raid to seize the city by force, he was captured and met a slow, gruesome end at the hands of his former pupil. With the Arakoa threat silenced and their former masters broken, the Gorian Empire entered a golden age of expansion, establishing massive militant strongholds like Highmaul and Bladespire Hold. Goria became the world's premier center for arcane study, where ogre mages eventually learned to magically induce the birth of 2-headed children, spellcasters who would ensure that the Empire's intellectual and mystical power remained unchallenged across the continents. Now, the moment many of you have been waiting for, the rise of the Orcs. The downfall of the Ogren and Groan hierarchies at the hands of the Gorian Empire inadvertently sparked a transformative era for the Orcish race. As they emerged from their subterranean refuges to claim the surface of Draenor, this newfound freedom triggered a massive population explosion that quickly strained the resources of Gorgrond, forcing the Orcs to diversify or migrate to avoid internal collapse. Within the ancestral cradle of Gorgrond, the Blackrock clan rose to prominence by mastering the secrets of metallurgy and Blackrock ore, while the Dragon Maw gained infamy for taming the winged Rylax. They were joined by the Laughing Skull, who embraced a manic survivalism, and the Lightning's Blade, both of whom carved out territories in the harsh volcanic landscape. These clans turned Gorgrand into a hub of industry and martial development, forever changing the Orcs from cave dwellers into a dominant surface power. As overcrowding reached a breaking point, a great migration fractured the Orcs into distinct cultural groups defined by the perilous environments they settled. In the treacherous Tanaan jungle, the Bleeding Hollow developed a superstitious and savage culture to survive poisonous flora, while the exiled Bone Chewers descended into madness and cannibalism. To the west, in the frozen wastes of Frostfire Ridge, the Frost Wolves and White Claws chose to live in harmony with the land by befriending native wolves, contrasting sharply with the Thunderlord clan, who sought to dominate the region by hunting the remaining Grown. Meanwhile, those who ventured south into the fertile valleys of Talador split into the Burning Blade, Redwalkers, and Bladewinds, clans that would eventually become legendary for their martial prowess and distinct traditions of combat. The southern reaches of the continent saw the birth of the most specialized Orcish societies, ranging from nomadic warriors to celestial mystics. In the sweeping prairies of Nagrand, the Warsong clan established a nomadic, battle-hardened lifestyle, constantly engaging in bloody skirmishes with the Gorian Empire to defend their roaming grounds. Far to the southeast, the Shadowmoon clan sought a more peaceful existence in the valley that shared their name, turning away from constant warfare to focus on the movements of the stars and the whispers of their ancestors. By the time the dust of the migration settled, the Orcish race had evolved from a singular people into a complex tapestry of clans, each uniquely adapted to the diverse and dangerous biomes of Draenor, from the mountaintop areas of the Dragon Maw to the starlit temples of the Shadowmoon. Driven by prophetic visions and celestial dreams, the Shadowmoon mystics embarked on pilgrimages that led them to the northwestern mountains of Nagrand, the sacred final resting place of the Titan giant Grond. At the base of these mountains, where the giant's massive head formed a serene island within a tranquil lake, the Orcs discovered the primordial spirits of fire, air, earth, and water. This site, christened the Throne of the Elements, became the cradle of Orcish shamanism. Unlike the Gorian ogres who violently bent the world to their will through arcane sorcery, the Orcs approached these spirits with profound reverence and harmony. The Shadowmoon were the first to formalize these teachings, transforming Grond's remains into a crude but holy temple, and demonstrating that those who moved in concert with the elements could perform miracles, diverting floods or summoning gales to repel Arakoa raiders, miracles that no Orc had ever witnessed before. As shamanism spread across Draenor, it became the spiritual backbone of the Orcish race, fostering a rare sense of unity among the disparate and often territorial clans. Young Orcs were raised to be allies of the spirits, eventually journeying to the Throne of the Elements to seek a blessing through ritual trances. However, the path was not without peril. A few unfortunate souls accidentally peered beyond the physical veil into the terrifying void, a glimpse that shattered their minds and led to their exile. These outcasts, marked with white skull tattoos to signify they were dead to their kin, lived in the caves beneath Nagrand. For the worthy, however, the role of shaman carried immense political weight, as they served as the highest advisors to the chieftains and mediators between rival groups. This spiritual kinship culminated in the Kashharg Festival, a biannual gathering established by the Shadowmoon, where all clans put aside their blood feuds to feast, share news, and honor their shared heritage in peace. While the Gorian Empire and Orcish clans flourished elsewhere, the Spires of Arok remained a forbidden territory. Guarded by the now labeled High Arakoa, A proud yet superstitious remnant of the fallen Apexis civilization, these winged beings lived under a rigid theocracy led by the Anhar order, who twisted the worship of the sun goddess Rukmar into a tool of oppression. They utilized the cursed land of Seathic Hollow. Yes, it's pronounced Seathic Hollow per Wowpedia and other sites. You don't have to like it, like I don't, but that's how it is. Anyways, they utilized the cursed Seathic Hollow, which was a valley tainted by the blood of the serpent god Seath. They used it as a site for religious purges, casting down heretics to be deformed into flightless outcasts. These cursed exiles were left to the mercy of the Saberun, a feline race of apex predators. The conflict escalated when Pride Lord Karash of the Saberun Bloodmane tribe developed sophisticated hunting tactics using nets and harpoons to bring down flying Arakoa, launching a full-scale war that brought the High Arakoa to the brink of collapse. The tides of war were turned only by the legendary King Terokk, who personally led daring raids and eventually slew Karash in single combat. In the aftermath of his victory, Turokk's popularity soared, prompting him to commission the glorious Sky City of Skyreach, an attempt to reform Arakoan society by stripping the Anhari priests of their power. Fearing their loss of influence, the priests, rebranding themselves as the adherents of Rukmar, orchestrated a midnight coup, kidnapping Terokk and his daughter Lithik. Both were cast into the cursed pools of Seathic Hollow. While Lithik perished, Terokk survived, though he emerged as a twisted, flightless outcast. The adherents seized total control, abolishing the monarchy and declaring that Turokk's bloodline had been cursed by the sun goddess herself, ensuring a future defined by religious zealotry. In the shadows of the Hollow, the broken Terokk found a new patron in the dread raven god Anzu, who was revealed to still be active within the world. Under Anzu's tutelage, Terokk and his fellow exiles mastered the forbidden arts of shadow magic and sorcery, giving rise to the Talon priests. They established the city of Skedis upon Apex's ruins and claimed the surrounding territory, which would come to be known as Terokkar Forest. However, the curse of Seath eventually drove Terokk toward a homicidal madness, forcing his own Talon priests to seal him away in a shadow realm for his people's protection. Despite this tragedy, the outcast society continued to expand in secret, bolstered by every so-called heretic that the adherents threw from the spires, eventually growing into a population that rivaled their winged oppressors. For generations, the Gorian Empire viewed the Orcish clans with a mixture of indifference and amusement, regarding their shamanistic traditions as quaint trickery compared to the structured, codified arcane might of the imperators. This dismissive attitude vanished when the ogres witnessed the raw power of an elder shaman commanding the elements to thwart a catastrophic flood. Driven by a desire for dominance rather than spiritual humility, Imperator Moloch dispatched an army to seize the throne of the elements by force. The ogres, lacking any reverence for the sanctity of the site, began to aggressively dissect the area with arcane spellwork, entirely unaware that they were tampering with the volatile, Titan-empowered remains of the giant Grond. The Gorians' reckless experimentation eventually triggered a cataclysmic resonance between their arcane magic and Grond's residual Titan energies, culminating in a massive explosion that obliterated the ancient Skull Temple and killed every sorcerer within. When the dust settled, the grand temple the orcs had carved into the giant skull was gone, leaving behind only a few standing stones that remain as a haunting monument to the disaster. This catastrophe threw the elemental spirits of Draenor into a state of violent turmoil, manifesting as world-lashing storms and spiritual agony. Undeterred by the carnage, Imperator Malak viewed the blast as definitive proof of the power he craved, and immediately sent a second wave of sorcerers to occupy the ruins. This final desecration, coupled with the desperate pleas of the tormented elements crying out from the wreckage, forced the traditionally divided Orcish clans to finally abandon their isolation and mobilize for an all-out war against the Gorian Empire. Before we continue, I'd like to mention that if you're enjoying this episode, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. And if you ever feel like supporting the work that I do here, you can check out my membership options here on YouTube or over on Patreon. I really do appreciate the support from everyone who has already done so. I'm not really in a position to offer much in return, but what I do offer is early access to the videos when I publish them. But now, having said that, let's get back to our story. The traditional revelry of the Kashhard festival was replaced by a somber council of mourning for what had happened at the Throne of the Elements. The Orcish clans faced the terrifying reality of a world in collapse. With the elemental spirits so rattled by the Gorian explosion that the natural cycles of Draenor were broken, this spiritual turmoil manifested in destructive, unceasing storms and the looming threat of a global famine that, without the spirit's balance, might never end, potentially starving every clan into extinction. Driven by the impassioned plea of the Shadowmoon Elder Shaman Nelgarm, the fractured clans achieved an unprecedented unity, marching as a single people to reclaim the Throne of the Elements and silence the meddling Gorian sorcerers. While the Orcs initially drove the Ogres back with ease, Imperator Malak retaliated with a campaign of total war, ordering the slaughter of every Orcish man, woman, and child to strike terror into their hearts. This cruelty backfired, as the resilient clans launched a sophisticated guerrilla campaign, using small, mobile raiding parties to dismantle the Gorian Empire's fortresses and trade networks, ultimately pushing the Ogre armies back to their own capital, Goria. As the Siege of Goria commenced, the unified Orcs opted for a strategy of attrition rather than a costly frontal assault. Surrounding the capital's landward side, while the Ogres relied on their massive seaport for supplies, Imperator Malak and his sorcerers initially believed they could outlast the blockade. But as their land-based trade networks crumbled, desperation took hold. Delving into the dark lore of Apex's crystals, the Gorian mages unearthed the legend of the Curse of Seath and engineered a horrific biological weapon known as the Red Pox. This wasting, highly contagious disease tore through the Orcish encampments, killing thousands and leaving the healthy warriors too few to maintain the siege or launch an attack. Realizing their traditional tactics were failing against this unseen sorcerous plague, the Orcish chieftains faced an existential crisis. They were being systematically hollowed out by a disease that showed no signs of stopping. In a desperate, unprecedented move, the elder shaman Nelgarm and his peers beseeched the elemental spirits to move beyond defense and commit an act of total annihilation. The elements, still reeling from the ogre's earlier desecration of the throne, responded with a terrifying, coordinated fury that lasted for hours. A monstrous storm battered Goria from above, while violent earthquakes shattered its legendary fortifications and interior structures. Fire engulfed the city, incinerating the escape ships in the harbor and ensuring no one could flee. Finally, the earth itself fractured open like a giant maw, swallowing the ruins, the remaining population, and Imperator Malak whole, leaving nothing behind but ash and a scarred landscape. The destruction of Goria signaled the end of the Gorian Empire as a global superpower. as its remaining strongholds like Highmaul and Bladespire Hold fractured into isolated city-states, too terrified of elemental retribution to seek vengeance. Though the Orcs emerged as the dominant race on Draenor, their victory was somber and haunted. They had witnessed a level of elemental wrath that frightened even the Shaman, leading the clans to dissolve their union and return to their ancestral lands. The scars of the war remained permanent, however, as the Red Pox began a lingering curse that would resurface to plague the Orcish people for generations. While the Ogres retreated into their remaining fortresses, the Orcs seized vast swaths of former Imperial territory, unaware that their era of undisputed dominance was already approaching a new, unforeseen threat. The Draenei's final journey to Draenor ended in a nightmare when the Naaru K'ure lost its connection to the light and was consumed by the void. This transformation turned the holy being into a creature of shadow that attacked the other Naaru within the Genedar, threatening to destroy everyone on board. Velen stepped in to save his people by using the light to shield the survivors and cast the corrupted K'ure out of the ship, where it was left to drift in the skies of Shadowmoon Valley. However, this act of bravery came at a heavy cost. Velen was badly injured and exhausted, causing him to lose the ability to see future events. This loss of foresight was a massive blow to the Draenei, and it would take him centuries to fully recover. The Genedar, pilotless and crippled, plummeted into the plains of Nagrand. The impact killed the Naaru K'ure and many Draenei, leaving the remains of the ship as a jagged, crystalline mountain known as Oshu'gun. The dying Naaru K'ure warned the survivors to leave the site immediately to avoid the spreading void energy. Stranded on a strange and dangerous world, Velen led the survivors into the unknown, determined to build a new life despite his weakened state. His first major act was to form the Rangari, an elite order of survivalist scouts and eyes of the prophets, tasked with mapping the mysteries of this strange new land and identifying the various threats, from the predatory wildlife to the crumbling Gorian Empire that lay hidden in the wilds. This first act of governance transformed the refugees into a structured society, one that would soon build a secret civilization under the shadow of the world's most dangerous inhabitants. After centuries of relying on Velen's near-perfect foresight to escape the Burning Legion, the Draenei faced a terrifying new reality on Draenor, where their leader's gift of sight was shattered. Velen's injuries rendered his visions unfocused, leaving him drifting between conflicting possibilities and, more disturbingly, nightmarish glimpses into the Void's desired future of a corrupted universe. Realizing that his judgment was no longer infallible, and that he could not distinguish true prophecy from the Void's dark dreams, Velen made the strategic decision to decentralize his power. He established a ruling council of 4 Exarchs, each tasked with overseeing a vital pillar of Draenei society, to ensure their survival without total reliance on a single prophet. This new leadership structure was composed of specialists who could address the immediate physical and spiritual needs of the refugees. Nayeli led the Rangari scouts to master the wilds, while Hataru guided the artificers, who were the engineers, in creating arcanite crystals to power their new civilization and protective constructs. Akama was appointed to lead the Vindicators, the elite warriors of the light charged with defending the people from Draenor's many threats. Finally, Othar was placed in command of the Shatari, an order dedicated to studying the remains of the fallen Naaru, such as Dore, to determine if they remain dangerous, and to find a way to re-establish contact with the light beyond their new home. In their search for a permanent home, the Rangari discovered a geographically ideal site protected by towering mountains with strategic access to the sea. Unaware that this land was the cursed site where the Ogre capital of Goria had been swallowed by elemental fury, the Draenei felt none of the superstitious dread that kept the Orcs and Ogres away. Velen led his people to these ruins and founded the city of Shattrath, which translates to Dwelling of Light. Under the guidance of the artificers, the Draenei labored tirelessly to transform the scarred landscape into a sprawling metropolis of crystal and stone, establishing a radiant foundation for their new civilization to thrive. As the city grew, a profound spiritual phenomenon was discovered by a member of the Shatari named Maladar. He realized that the decaying remains of the Naaru K'ure, which had drifted further into a void state, were acting as a mystical beacon for the souls of the Draenei who had perished in the Genedar crash. For the first time in the history of their race, the living were able to communicate with their departed kin. As the spirits of the dead lingered near the Naaru's darkening essence, recognizing the sensitivity and potential danger of this connection, Velen ordered the Naaru's remains to be moved to a secluded location on the outskirts of Terokk Forest, far from the prying eyes of Draenor's other inhabitants. To house the remains of K'ure and the gathering spirits of their ancestors, the Draenei constructed a massive, ornate mausoleum known as Auchindoun, or Home for the Honored Dead. This grand tomb city served as a sanctuary where the dead could rest and the living could seek their wisdom and peace. To oversee this sacred duty, Velen appointed Maladar as the 5th member of the council, granting him the title of Exarch. He was placed in charge of the Auchinai, a specialized order of priests and protectors dedicated to communing with the deceased and shielding their souls from any external harm or dark corruption. While Velen initially hoped to keep the Draenei isolated within the walls of Shattrath to avoid disturbing the native Orcs and Ogres, he was forced to reverse this policy upon discovering the ecological catastrophe caused by the Genedar's crash. The vessel's impact had hemorrhaged a volatile mixture of light, void, and arcane energies that violently warped Draenor's flora and fauna, inciting a frenzy among the ancient primals and breakers. Realizing the Draenei had a moral obligation to heal the world they had inadvertently scarred, Velen sanctioned an expansion across the continent, deploying artificers and vindicators to establish a network of outposts linked to the world's ley lines. The pinnacle of this effort was the construction of the Temple of Kerebor in the east of Shadowmoon Valley, a holy sanctuary that used concentrated light to stabilize the environment and eventually quiet the aggressive primal forces. This expansion inevitably brought the Draenei into the awareness of the native races, particularly the Shadowmoon Orcs, whose culture obsession with the heavens led them to a dangerous misunderstanding of the Draenei's arrival. The Orcish mystics became fixated on the remains of the fallen Naaru K'ure, which hung in the sky as a terrifying eclipse they dubbed the Dark Star. Despite Velen's desire for peace, several ambitious Orc shaman attempted to harness the Dark Star's power, only to have their minds shattered by the raw void energy within. Horrified by these results, the Shadowmoon leadership declared the Dark Star's power forbidden, instituting a strict law of exile for any who dared to touch its shadowy essence, a decree that inadvertently created a class of outcasts, while the Draenei continued to build their shimmering civilization in the valley below. The decaying Naaru K'ure, trapped within the crystalline wreckage of the Genedar, unintentionally revolutionized Orcish spirituality by attracting the souls of their departed ancestors. Much like K'ure had for the Draenei, the Orcs christened the crash site Oshu'gun, or the Mountain of Spirits, and began making frequent pilgrimages to its base to seek the counsel of their dead, who were often imbued with newfound wisdom from the ship's lingering light energies. This development deeply unsettled the Draenei, While the Orcs celebrated this connection, the Shatari observed that K'ure was a massive, intact engine of potential corruption. Velen and his council feared that any attempt to intervene or purify the mountain would spark a holy war with the Orcs. Yet they knew that as K'ure's light faded, the bleeding void energies would eventually poison the very spirits the Orcs held dear. The most immediate and horrific consequences of K'ure's decay was the birth of the Pale, a society of Orcish outcasts. If you remember, they were the shamans who had been driven mad by the void and tattooed with white skulls. They began tunneling beneath Oshu'gun to feast upon the dark energies seeping into the earth. This exposure mutated their bodies into a sickly white and allowed them to commune with void lords, entities that filled their minds with visions of the apocalypse and taught them the art of shadow magic. While the broader Orcish clans remained blissfully unaware of this subterranean threat, viewing the reclusive Draenei as little more than a peaceful, divine curiosity, the Gorian ogres watched from afar with a much more predatory lens. To the remaining Ogre imperators, the Draenei's peaceful isolation was not a sign of holiness, but a glaring invitation for conquest.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this kind of content, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing, please check out my YouTube, Patreon, or Twitch memberships. And a big shout out to all the names on the screen here. You mean so much to me. Thank you so much for your help. And with that, I'll see you guys next time on the Tales of Azeroth.